The team is posted around the hidden mountain lake. Ronnie and Maria are on the north and south sides and will make their way through the surrounding forest towards the lake, hoping to drive the creature out onto the banks, where Russell can observe it with the tethered drone.
Deep in the wilderness, the team wasn't just walking through the forest. They were walking into the unknown. The lake stood still, dark like glass, reflecting nothing but the void above it. The kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl. Not because of what you can hear, but because of what you can't. Thermal cameras clicked to life. Night vision blinked into action. Yet what they found was not clarity, only confusion. The darkness had a way of swallowing their light, as if the forest had no intention of revealing its secrets tonight. The first flicker. Then, it happened. A flicker on the thermal screen. Just for a second, barely long enough to register. But there it was, a massive heat signature, unmistakably alive, and unlike anything they'd seen before. This wasn't some fleeting squirrel or startled elk. It wasn't even bear-sized. No, it was bigger, heavier, more deliberate. The screen pulsed again, briefly, before it vanished entirely. No trace, no residual heat trail, gone as quickly as it came. But that wasn't what disturbed them the most. It was the way it disappeared. Not in a panic, not randomly, but methodically. Like it knew where the blind spots were. Like it was aware it was being watched, and didn't care. Almost like it was playing a game. Above the treetops, Russell guided the drone with quiet intensity.
Right now I'm looking for anything that puts out a heat trace that would be moving on the screen anywhere near or around this water source. I got Ronnie and Maria on their way on the outside of this lake on both sides. They've actually separated. They both are equipped with thermal imaging to monitor any of the areas I can't see.
His fingers moved with practiced ease, but his jaw tightened. He had a bird's eye view of the lake, the surrounding terrain, and every shift in the tree line, and yet, nothing. The figure had slipped behind the branches with surgical precision, as if it belonged here more than they ever could. Maria freezes. On the ground, Maria had stopped mid-step. She wasn't moving, and not because she chose to pause. It was instinct. A stillness overcame her, like her body had registered a presence before her mind could process it. She wasn't alone. She could feel it. Something unseen, something near. Then it came. The sound. A distinct crack from above her. The treetops. Branches shifted ever so slightly. Leaves trembled without wind. The sound wasn't loud, but it wasn't casual either. It had intention. Her eyes lifted slowly toward the canopy, heart thudding in her ears. The forest around her darkened further. She clutched her thermal camera tightly, knuckles white around the handle. It offered light, heat, and logic, but it wasn't comforting anymore. Something was above her, not running, not stalking, watching, and that simple realization froze her in place. Her breath caught halfway in her throat.
Do you hear that? There's something walking towards us over there. What? It's moving above us.
Unsure whether to inhale or hold still, the only motion she allowed was a slow pivot, scanning her surroundings without daring to move her feet. Because in that moment, she knew with unsettling clarity she wasn't just part of an investigation anymore. She had become the subject. The forest wasn't silent, it was listening, and she was being watched, not by a camera, not by her team, but by something that didn't belong on any of their radar. The predator's patience. Not every threat charges head-on. Some wait. Maria's eyes rose toward the treetops, not out of curiosity, but certainty. Something was there. The forest above her had taken on a different weight. The air felt tighter, heavier, as if something unseen pressed down from above. Then, without warning, the leaves shifted. Not a gust, not an animal scurry. It was a movement, subtle, purposeful, and then a shape emerged. It was perched in the canopy, perfectly still. Russell's thermal feed picked it up. A distinct pulse of heat, dense and alive. It filled the screen for a single, startling heartbeat. Then, it was gone. The shape didn't run or vanish in panic. It melted into the forest, not by chance or by choice. From his drone station, Russell kept his voice measured, but the edge was impossible to miss. "We lost the signal." 3 words, simple, but they echoed like thunder in the ears of the team. The silence that followed was crushing. It wasn't peace. It wasn't nature resting. It was a silence that waited, heavy, alert, watching back. Then came movement. Not one, not two. The thermal readout near Maria split. 2 shapes, then 3. Then 4. Whatever they weren't retreating. They were multiplying. And worse, they were repositioning. They weren't just observing from afar. Above, a large figure lingered just within the tangle of branches. Another darted lower, weaving through the trunks like it had done it 100 times before. They didn't thunder through the undergrowth or snap branches in their path. They were deliberate, aware of sound, of presence, of surveillance. Russell scanned again, but the dense canopy offered no favors. Still no clear thermal, he muttered. Frustration barely hidden. Might be interference, glitches, but Maria wasn't buying it. She could feel it in her chest. This wasn't faulty equipment. This was intentional. These shapes weren't hiding because they were afraid. They weren't avoiding detection out of instinct. They were choosing when and how to appear. They were controlling the narrative. Maria adjusted her stance, scanning with renewed intensity. This wasn't about surprise anymore. It was a silent demonstration of control. Whatever was out there wasn't running from them. The forest watches back. Ronnie moved deeper into the trees, guided only by instinct and the subtle, barely there sounds that crept in from the shadows. At first, it was a rustle, then another. This sound repeated, steady, almost like footsteps made with intention. It had a rhythm. It had timing. It was too careful to be an accident, and too slow to be random. He paused, holding his breath, his ears strained. Again, the sound. To his left, then behind him, then silence. A silence so sudden and complete, it made him question whether he had heard anything at all. But he had. He was sure of it. Whatever it wasn't moving blindly. It wasn't blundering through the forest like an animal startled by lights and motion. No, this thing had purpose. It was tracking, maybe signaling, or maybe it was just letting him know it was there. Ronnie didn't like it, not because he was afraid of the woods, but because the woods felt different now, as if the trees had eyes, as if the forest itself had turned against him. Russell tried to keep control. From his vantage point behind the drone controls, he clung to reason. Just an animal, he said flatly. The forest was full of them. Movement wasn't proof. Sound wasn't proof. But Ronnie knew better. The atmosphere had shifted. It wasn't just his imagination. It was instinct. And in places like this, instinct usually outranked evidence. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on edge, and he hadn't felt that way since his first week out here. Something was off. Deeply off. And then, confirmation, if you could call it that. Back at the lake, Maria's screen lit up with familiar heat patterns. 4 distinct signatures. Tall, wide, steady, watching. But then, 2 of them vanished. They simply disappeared. She scanned again. Nothing. Not a single disturbance in the canopy. No rustled leaves. No shifting branches. No sound of a body brushing past brush or bark. It was as though those shapes had never existed. And that's what made her stomach drop. The idea that something so large, so close, could vanish without a trace. That's what frightened her most. Russell's voice cut through the radio. Lower now, more direct. He didn't waste time with theory. He gave orders. Ronnie, close the gap. Get to Maria. The lake was no longer neutral ground. What had once seemed like the safest observation point was now a dead zone, where creatures could appear and disappear at will. But sending Ronnie came with a risk. The remaining figures hadn't moved. They still hovered in place, watching, waiting. They weren't aggressive, nor were they afraid, just present. If they had been territorial, the team would have already faced aggression. But they hadn't. If they had been scared, they'd have fled. But they stayed. So what did that mean? Ronnie approached with care, every step a calculation. And as he moved closer to Maria's position, a single truth settled in all too clearly. These creatures weren't just lurking. They were learning, and they were watching just as much, if not more, than the team ever could. A chilling realization. Maria crouched low at the base of a thick oak tree, its bark rough against her back, grounding her in the only tangible reality she had left. Her breathing was shallow. The camera in her grip remained trained forward, though her fingers trembled slightly from older, deeper, primal fear. It wasn't the kind of fear that came from sudden movement or loud noises. This was the kind that seeps in, slow and certain, the kind you don't recognize until it's fully wrapped around you. She had entered this forest with the hope of discovery, maybe even proof. But in this moment, all of that felt naive, because suddenly, everything clicked. This wasn't hide and seek. It never had been. This was a test, and not one they were giving, but one they were taking. The realization sank like a stone in her gut. The creatures weren't just hiding. They were orchestrating. Every appearance, every movement, every moment of silence. It wasn't random. It was designed. They were controlling the pace, setting the rhythm, dictating when to be seen and when to vanish. Maria wasn't in charge of this encounter. None of them were. They had been invited into a performance they didn't understand, and worse, couldn't direct. And the most unnerving part? She could feel it. That creeping certainty that every step they took, every sound they made, was being studied, measured, judged. Across the forest, Ronnie had stopped again. Stillness surrounded him, broken only by the faint, almost imperceptible movement ahead. Not just noise, motion. Slow, steady, intentional. It wasn't the crash of something startled. It wasn't the scuttle of nocturnal wildlife trying to escape detection. This was different. He radioed in, voice low, tight, movement 10 meters ahead. His eyes scanned through the faint green haze of the night vision lens, catching only glimpses of brush shifting, leaves swaying. The forest ahead seemed to breathe, expanding and collapsing in on itself. Shapes danced just at the edges of visibility, never fully revealing, never fully withdrawing. Russell responded quickly, trying to anchor the tension with logic. "Can you see it?" Ronnie hesitated, then replied, "No, it's too fast." But fast wasn't the right word. Not really. Not in the way a predator sprints or a deer bolts. It was smooth, familiar, like it knew this terrain better than any human ever could. It moved with knowledge, with memory, not just through the forest, but with it. And that was what unnerved Ronnie the most. Mireya's thermal camera flared again, the screen suddenly pulsing with faint color. Life in the darkness. There it was. One heat signature, then another. They hovered at the edges of the display, as if teasing her, daring her to track them. Not enough to reveal form or shape, just enough to say, "We're still here." She caught outlines, a shoulder, a partial head, a leg bending, just barely captured before vanishing. Every time she tried to focus, the image would blur or disappear. They weren't hiding anymore. They were present, yet unreachable. Not fleeing, not charging. Just existing, hovering on the edge of her understanding. And still they didn't leave. They were choosing this standoff. She raised the radio again. Her voice was quiet, but steady. "They're still here." The words didn't feel like an alert. They felt like a confession. Russell's reply came quickly. "Don't approach. Just observe." But observe what? Mireya stared at the screen, watching the flickering shapes shift again, as if responding to the command. They offered no answers, no clarity. Just enough to keep her asking questions. Were these real creatures, or were they ghosts made of heat and silence? And if they were real, what exactly were they waiting for? Tracking shadows. Russell leaned in closer to the monitor, eyes narrowed, fingers rapidly adjusting the drone controls. But the display offered nothing new. Thick layers of canopy blanketed the forest below, turning the thermal feed into a smear of useless color. The drone's sensors struggled to penetrate the natural ceiling, rendering their most advanced piece of technology virtually blind. They were cut off from above, flying blind in a place that was already unforgiving by foot. But even without visual confirmation, something felt off, deeply off. The airwaves were clean, the screens were still, but the sense of being watched, of something intelligent tracking their every move, remained. Stronger even. The hairs on Russell's arms rose despite the cold logic in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere beneath that forest canopy, eyes were locked onto his team, waiting. And then Mireya's voice cracked through the radio, low and deliberate. "They're flanking me." 3 words. That was all it took to change everything. Russell froze, his breath caught in his throat. Every ounce of control, every system in place, suddenly felt fragile. Ronnie didn't wait for instruction. With his heart pounding in his chest, Ronnie took off at a run. The ground was uneven, the terrain unpredictable, but none of it mattered. His camera bounced against his shoulder, ignored. Each breath came sharper, harder. He wasn't sprinting blindly. He was charging towards something unknown, and he could feel it. Something was shifting around him. The air was denser now, thick with unseen pressure, as though the forest itself was pushing back. Then, mid-stride, his earpiece went silent. Mireya's voice, gone. The signal didn't fade out. It just stopped, cut clean. Russell's voice snapped across the channel a moment later, demanding updates. His tone clipped, urgent, holding back panic. But all that came in return was static. Nothing. No voice, no sound, no sign of Mireya. Ronnie didn't hesitate. His pace quickened, ignoring the branches slashing at his arms, the brush dragging at his legs. The rules of caution had long since been abandoned. Whatever was out there wasn't just a passive mystery anymore. It had moved. It had acted. And Ronnie could feel it now. Not just anxiety, not just nerves. It was pressure. Like something unseen was growing nearer with every step. Ronnie tore through the tree line, his breath ragged and heart pounding as the terrain suddenly opened into a narrow clearing. His body moved on instinct, scanning the area with frantic precision. Yet the space ahead held no answers, only absence. The clearing was unsettling in its stillness. The brush lay untouched, the branches undisturbed, no sign of struggle, no prints, no heat trails. The ground beneath him looked exactly the same as it had hours ago, except now it felt haunted. No signals came through the thermal. The screen remained cold, colorless. Even the sounds of distant wildlife had faded. The normal rhythm of the forest, the hum of insects, the distant calls of nocturnal creatures, was gone, as if the entire ecosystem had momentarily held its breath. Then, without warning, a rustle from behind a low curtain of branches caught his attention. Ronnie pushed through them and emerged to find Mireya crouched low behind the fallen trunk of a massive oak, nearly blending into the underbrush. Her posture was defensive, almost instinctively protective. The camera she held trembled slightly in her grip. Her face was pale, and her eyes wide, locked in an unfocused stare that seemed fixed on something beyond the clearing. She hadn't moved in a while. That much was obvious. Whatever had happened here had rooted her to the ground, not out of physical exhaustion, but shock. She slowly raised her arm and gestured toward the tree line opposite the clearing. What had stood in those trees moments before was now gone, and yet the presence lingered. There had been multiple heat signatures, more than one figure, and then, with an eerie precision, they had vanished. Not into the brush, not through the trees. They had disappeared as if melting into the woods themselves, leaving no trace. But not all of them. Two had remained, holding position, still watching. And that, more than anything, was what twisted the tension into something colder. It wasn't just a fleeting encounter anymore. It was surveillance, the kind of attention that doesn't come from curiosity. Ronnie didn't need to ask where the others had gone. The real concern wasn't the ones that left. It was why they had left two behind. A fractured silence. Inside the base, Russell sat motionless, his eyes locked onto the flickering monitors. Every sensor input, every scrap of thermal data, was running through his mind on a loop. For a brief moment, the heat signatures had returned, clear, defined, and far too large to dismiss. But just as quickly, they were gone. Again. It was like watching shadows play tricks on light. A moment of clarity, then a curtain dropped. He leaned forward, elbows digging into the console, his mind racing. This wasn't the standard game of cat and mouse. This was something else entirely. Because how do you track something that doesn't want to be found? And worse, how do you protect your team from something that already knows exactly where they are? The silence in the base wasn't restful. It was brittle, as if one wrong breath would break it into pieces. No one spoke. Everyone felt the same truth rising beneath the surface. They weren't in control. Back in the forest, Mireya was still shaken, not because she had seen something unknown, but because of how it had acted. It hadn't roared. It hadn't stomped through the trees in a display of dominance. It hadn't fled in fear or scattered like prey. It had shifted its position, watched silently, disappeared and reappeared, not out of confusion, but by design. Its behavior wasn't erratic. It was precise, intentional. Mireya, trained in wildlife tracking, couldn't categorize it. No predator she had studied lingered in plain view unless it was preparing to strike. No prey held position unless cornered. But these creatures had done neither. They'd simply watched and adjusted, like they were running their own study on them. She knew animals. She knew fear responses, hunting strategies, and social behaviors. But what she witnessed tonight didn't belong in any textbook. It belonged in a different category altogether. As they moved away from the shoreline, Ronnie and Mireya stuck close together, navigating by muscle memory as much as by camera light. The forest wasn't guiding them anymore. It felt like it was narrowing around them. Every step was quieter now. Russell's voice cut through the radio, composed but clipped. He was still issuing commands, still trying to hold the structure together. Keep moving. Keep your backs to the trees. Stay out of open ground. Don't let them circle you. Each instruction wasn't just tactical, it was survival. Wind rustled through the trees in quick, whispering bursts. Not enough to identify direction, just enough to hide movement, or suggest it. They could feel it again. That presence, that pull. What lives in these woods? Is it a legend? Is it a fact? Or is it something in between? The night never gave them the answer, but it did give them something else. A moment of clarity. That may be the real story, is that some truths are only revealed when you stop searching and start listening.
Oh my God.
Whoa.
From encountering weird Bigfoot territory markers to Mireya going missing in the woods, this was Expedition Bigfoot's shocking discovery.
So is this more similar to what you found?
Bigfoot territory markers. During one of their expeditions, Bryce and Maria from Expedition Bigfoot came across something they could not explain in the woods. As they searched the woods for clues, they saw a massive tree structure unlike anything they had ever seen. Though they had found similar structures before, like one in Alaska, this one was far bigger and harder to explain.
Seems a little bit odd.
This looks to me like signaling. You think this is natural?
There's no obvious cut marks anyway.
They couldn't figure out how it was made or who might have created it. To Bryce, this was amazing, while to Maria, this was quite odd. They both saw the way the trees were set up, looking like they formed a shelter. But the shelter-like structure was huge, about 15 feet high, almost like a Bigfoot house. And there was more. The top of the structure stood out. The trees were carefully and intentionally woven together by someone or something with intelligence. It felt like more than just nature at work. In their expertise, they knew that this could not have been done by a human being since the structure was deep in the woods and no logging activity was present in the area. After a deeper examination of the tree structure, Bryce came up with the theory that no ordinary animal could have done this. On top of that, to Bryce, this tree structure could not have been built by just anyone or anything. It looked like a group effort. There were about a dozen logs, each weighing 150 to 200 pounds, arranged with intricate designs. He thought the structure was odd and believed it would have taken several men to build it. The purpose? A complete mystery. So, what or who really built these structures? And for what? Having seen similar structures in their previous expeditions in different parts of the world, they were now joining the dots. At this point, Bryce was very optimistic about this finding, but Maria didn't seem to think that the structure was that significant. Though their points of view were different, they both agreed that the structure was an excellent spot to search for DNA. They believed that if the structure was made and not natural, whoever or whatever created it must have left some evidence of their presence behind. As they searched for anything they could use for DNA tests, Bryce argued that if the structure was built by someone or something, then it must have had a purpose. Bryce believed the tree structure was a Bigfoot boundary marker, showing their nesting territory. He explained they were right in the center of it. Maria noticed his excitement, and while agreeing that the structure was interesting based on his analysis, she cautioned against jumping to conclusions too quickly. That was just like Maria, always urging caution. A scientist takes a logical approach to gathering data and evidence of pseudoscience beliefs. Maria's role in the team was clear. She focused on analyzing pseudoscientific data and presenting it in a way that mainstream science could accept. She believed the team needed to speak the language of their critics. By doing this, she aimed to provide logical proof of Bigfoot's existence, bridging the gap between skepticism and belief. For this reason, Maria was always careful and hesitant when it came to calling something evidence. She never saw the tree structure as proof of anything. Instead, it simply reminded her of a similar tree structure they had once found in Kentucky. And Kentucky was an interesting place since the crew had gotten some of their most interesting DNA results. Understanding where Maria was coming from, Bryce agreed, and they decided to look for more clues. Maria decided to search for possible samples beneath the structure, while Bryce examined the outside for any clues that might help with their research. The area surrounding the structure gave the team several potential samples to examine later, which filled them with hope for their investigation. They felt optimistic as the samples they found could potentially provide valuable insights. Their hopes were high, and the discovery of the samples seemed promising for the progress of their work. That is, if these samples turned out to belong to a creature they had not yet encountered. According to Maria, if the findings of an expedition are isolated and far apart, they do not end up being so significant. However, when they discovered multiple samples across different locations and investigations, it raised a big question. Were these pieces of evidence part of something much larger? As they searched the structures for more clues, Bryce came across some hair samples. He then called Maria to check them out.
Hey, Maria.
What is it?
It looks like a hair.
Where are you seeing it?
All right over here. Check it out.
After obtaining the samples, Bryce expressed his interest in taking the hair to the lab for DNA examination. This structure was turning out to be quite a strange one. Not only was it weird looking, but it also had multiple samples of hair all over and around it. Whether or not the samples belonged to Bigfoot or they belonged to a curious bear, It was something they could not tell by just looking at the hair samples. They needed to send these samples to the lab for a deeper analysis. For what it's worth, these findings increased their hunger for the truth, and so, to get more clues, they decided to go deeper into the forest and explore more areas like the riverbanks, a common place to find potential clues since all creatures must drink water. But nothing could prepare them for what they were about to experience that night. Bryce's creepy encounter. Bryce had set up a base in the forest to observe everything around him. He thought that since Bigfoot would not reveal himself directly to them during the day, spying the area at night in stealth mode would enable them to capture clear footage of the creature. Inside the tent he had pitched, he arranged every piece of equipment a scientist could get his hands on, determined to gather as much information as possible. Aware he was in a dangerous, unexplored area, Bryce took every step to ensure he wasn't detected by any creature of the night. But how could he avoid being noticed in a tent? The tent he used was unlike any other. Its fabric was designed to block all EMF frequencies from the research equipment, turning it into a giant frequency cage. With the EMF blocked, anything inside the tent became invisible to creatures sensitive to changes in frequency. He had an idea of what this simple setup could mean for their safety that night. But that's not all he had. Bryce had set up thermal cameras all around the tent to catch heat signatures at night, along with infrared cameras to see in the dark. These cameras were placed in different directions to cover as much ground as possible and detect any threats near the tent. While the cameras handled the visuals, Bryce had also set up parabolic microphones to pick up even the faintest sounds from anything that might be hiding in the woods nearby. If something approached his position, he would see it or hear it. At least, that's what he thought.
I've got thermal set up, I've got infrared, I've got north, south, and west covered, but I've also set up a parabolic microphone. Faced anything making noise, walking through the brush, we're gonna be able to hear it.
With all this tech and the invisibility cloak for a tent, he must have been feeling quite invincible. But he was not as undetectable as he thought. Bryce sat quietly, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever was out there. As he waited, his parabolic microphone picked up strange sounds near his tent. Though he couldn't see anything, he felt sure something was hiding in the woods. He listened carefully, praying that whatever was making the noises would appear on his camera. As dangerous as it was for him to expose himself like that, he hoped to capture solid proof of Bigfoot. Judging by the nature of the sound he heard, Bryce knew that the creature making them had to be large in size. But the fact that he could not spot it on any of the cameras gave Bryce the creeps, since he felt like he was being watched by something he could not see. For this reason, he kept his eyes peeled, looking at the video feed from all the screens, hoping to catch the creature causing the noises. Bryce tried to calm himself, thinking it was just a bear or a deer messing with him. But deep down, his survival instincts wouldn't let him ignore the thought of something smarter, something dangerous, hiding, watching from behind trees, waiting for the right moment. Bryce couldn't shake the feeling that an intelligent predator had its eye on him. And then it happened. As he observed the screens, one of them caught a fast flash of light. Something had run past one of the cameras. Before he could make sense of what he had seen, Bryce saw another light a bit further in the distance. At this point, he knew that his visual detection equipment was definitely working. But what he could not help but wonder was whether the strange, elusive creatures were hunting him or just surrounding his tent out of curiosity. Before he could understand what was making the noise, he saw it. Hiding behind a tree, a few meters away from the tent, his thermal camera spotted something moving. Bryce sat in the tent, listening carefully to the noises outside. The sounds grew closer, and when he checked the thermal camera, he noticed a head peeking through the trees as if whatever was watching knew that he was there. He tried to keep an eye on the equipment, but his focus was drawn to the movement on the screen. Suddenly, something swiped across the camera's view. At that moment, a chilling thought crept over him. There wasn't just one creature out there. He was being watched by more than one, and he was alone. Bryce stayed hidden, knowing the risk he was taking. If anything found him, he'd be in real trouble. Bigfoot was unpredictable, especially when someone got too close to its territory, and Bryce was right in the middle of it. The thought of this made him even more fearful. The tent, though cleverly hidden, was his only shield. Its strength wasn't in keeping predators out, it was in staying undetectable. If any creature, Bigfoot or otherwise, picked up his presence, there'd be no stopping an attack. But Bryce, being in fear, did not stop the creatures from making more sounds. Then, all of a sudden, one of his cameras caught something coming out of the trees. It was something big, and he decided to follow the heat signal to get a better visual. He quickly got out of the tent, and the darkness in the woods swallowed him. Although he had a flashlight, he still struggled to see. He could not spot the creature. It was as if the creature had disappeared as soon as it heard the commotion of him rushing out of his tent and running towards it. His heart was racing, and he was still pretty fearful, feeling like he was prey in the darkness. Seeing that he could not catch the creature by storming and running after it, he decided to try a new strategy. For this, he called for reinforcements from his crew members. Blind chase. Instead of chasing the creature, which was proving to be really hard, they decided to let the creature come to them. But for this strategy to work, they needed bait. Russell, being a seasoned survivalist, decided to volunteer to become the bait. In his mind, he thought that should the creatures come for him, he would have a better chance of surviving than any other member of the crew, or so he thought. As he surveyed the woods, Bryce and other crew members were tracking his every move with the camera. At first, everything was good. The surveillance footage looked good, and they could clearly see Russell. Seeing that they were not getting much action, Russell decided to walk further into the woods to see if the creatures would follow him. Then, from nowhere, it appeared. From behind the trees up the hill, they saw a creature moving fast towards Russell. While Maria was also in that direction, the way the creature moved did not seem human at all. Seeing this, Bryce and the team quickly radioed Russell, who, upon receiving the message, asked for guidance from the team, since it was hard for him to see anything in the dark woods. Their job was to use the footage to direct Russell away from the creature, far enough for him to at least capture an image of whatever was coming towards him. The creature was coming from the east side of Russell. It was about 50 yards away, and it was closing in fast. As he followed the trail, Russell heard some noises. Something had definitely been there, and they had left signs around, not to mention a pretty strong stench. A typical scent they had experienced while on one of their expeditions in Alaska. With these signs, Russell knew that they were in the presence of Bigfoot. The closer he got to where Bryce had told him that the target was, the weirder and louder the noises got. But Russell was not about to lose his target by running away or hiding. He had already risked his life by becoming bait, and he wanted his sacrifice to pay off. Knowing that by now, the creature ought to have been really close, Russell went in the direction of the weird noises. But as he got closer, he heard something break a branch about 100 yards from him. After asking how long he was away from the creature, Bryce informed him that if he stayed that course, he would be able to intercept the creature. Hearing this, Russell decided to move towards where the creature was thought to be. On the other side of the mountain, Maria was following a heat signal they had seen a bit earlier. Bryce did some surveillance for her, and he noticed not one but two different heat signatures of strange-looking humanoid creatures moving in her direction. The woods were dark, and it was raining heavily. This meant that whatever Bryce was looking at in his thermal camera was not a group of loggers. It was rare for loggers to cut down trees when it was raining, let alone at night. On top of that, the rain and the darkness made seeing really difficult for Maria, and she could mostly rely on the visual feedback from Bryce. Being fearless, Maria got closer to the zone she had been told about by Bryce to get more information. Although they were trying their best to get the information, the weather conditions made it very difficult for them to see anything. But there was definitely something close to Maria. When Bryce asked Maria if she noticed anything, she told him she couldn't see or hear much because of the weather. The fog made it hard to track anything, and things were only getting worse. The surveillance team was losing sight of the second signature moving between the trees. The fog made it harder for them to keep track. Despite this, they urged Maria to keep walking in the same direction, saying she might still connect with the creature if she kept going. It was a bold decision for Maria, knowing she had two targets and one had already disappeared. But what made it truly terrifying was that she was now heading straight toward the last spot where the creature had been seen. Would she face it alone? Maria used her flashlight to scan the trees, hoping to catch any sign of movement in the direction she was heading. But everything seemed to be working against her. The steep terrain was extra smooth and dangerous, thanks to the rain that made every step harder. The downpour didn't just make the ground slippery. It swallowed up all other sounds, leaving Maria unable to hear much of anything. It was like moving through the dark, completely blind, as if she were lost in the woods. Despite searching tirelessly through the night, neither Maria nor Russell saw a thing. Each time they got close to something, it vanished, slipping away like it was deliberately avoiding them. The question hung in the air. Why would it go to such lengths to stay hidden? The next day, the team shifted its focus. They searched for footprints and checked an area where Russell had seen what looked like tracks left by a Bigfoot family. Would this finally be the breakthrough they were chasing? While this search turned out to be a wild goose chase. Despite all their efforts, the crew had other success stories. Expedition Bigfoot crew's video evidence. In one of their expeditions, Russell was doing surveillance of the area the crew had chosen to investigate. From afar, he noticed an animal-looking creature with black fur through the lens of his camera. At first, he thought it was a bear, which was a common animal in the area. This would not interest him if it were just a bear. But then something he did not expect happened. This animal decided to stand up on two of its feet and disappeared into the woods. Seeing this, Russell was shaken and decided to show it to his partner. "Zach, that thing just stood up like you and I would. Look at that shit," Russell told his partner. Russell couldn't believe his eyes, even after replaying the clip. He thought it was just a bear because of the fur, but then it stood up like a human, turned around, and walked away. It seemed like the creature had been squatting, maybe spying on prey, or even Russell and his crew. Although bears could stand on 2 feet, they weren't as steady as the creature he'd seen. Russell was thrilled by this and tried to get another look, zooming in around the area, hoping the creature would show up on the other side of the trees. But there was nothing to see. The creature had vanished. Overjoyed by this new find, Russell decided to go to the area where he had spotted the creature and investigate more, perhaps find some other clues. After a while, Russell could not wait to show the crew the video he had just captured, and so he called everyone back to base camp. They all gathered at base camp, where Russell had some exciting news to share. Everyone was eager to see what he'd discovered. Once Russell played the video, they could not believe their eyes. Russell explained that he had been watching the area through a telescope for a while. He said the clearings were over a mile away, and at first, he thought he saw a bear on the hillside. It looks like a bear, he had thought. But then, something changed. He told them to watch closely, saying it wasn't just a bear after all. Seeing the footage, Maria was astonished. They had come so close to uncovering the truth. To give them a better look, Russell slowed down the speed of the video, and there it was. Bryce and Maria, having a bit more knowledge about Bigfoot than the rest of the crew, could not believe this. To them, that was definitely something other than a bear. To Maria and Bryce, there was only one other possibility of a creature that could have that kind of behavior: be hairy and move like a human on 2 feet. Bigfoot.